When Lucas Wade stepped off the field for the last time, his cleats crunching against frozen Montana grass, he thought the hardest part was behind him. A torn ACL had ended his quarterback dreams, but at least his secret was safe. He was wrong. That night, Brad Hutchinson sat in their trailer kitchen, bourbon burning his throat as he scrolled through Lucas's phone. The device had fallen during their argument about college applications, and Brad, drunk on whiskey and old wounds, decided a man's phone was fair territory. What he found there made his blood turn to ice and his fists clench white. Brad was not Lucas's father. He was a ghost of wars fought overseas, a former Marine whose purple heart sat in a shoebox while nightmares filled every corner. When Sarah Wade died of cancer 10 months ago, Brad had stayed not from love, but from twisted duty. Maybe he had nowhere else to go. Emma Wade, only 10, had learned to make herself invisible when Brad's voice rose. She would slip into her bedroom, pressing her ear against thin wood to track danger. She became expert at reading signs, how his footsteps grew heavier as night wore on, how words slurred together like prayers in a language of rage. When Brad called Lucas into the kitchen that night, Emma knew something had shifted. There was stillness in Brad's voice more terrifying than shouting. Lucas walked into the fluorescent space and saw his phone in Brad's hands, screen glowing with evidence of conversations he thought were hidden. Brad did not ask questions. He simply stood up, chair scraping linoleum, and let his fist speak. The first blow caught Lucas across the jaw, bending him into the refrigerator. The second drove air from his lungs and sent him crashing into the kitchen table. When Emma tried to intervene, stepping between them with tears streaming, Brad shoved her hard enough to send her small body sprawling across the kitchen floor. The sound of her hitting cabinets finally broke something loose in Lucas. Not fear for himself, but fury at the man who would hurt the only family he had left. They left that night with nothing but clothes on their backs and Emma's hand clutched tight in Lucas's. Snow fell steadily as they walked through empty streets of Whitehorse, breath visible in frigid air. 8 miles stretched between them and Iron Thunder Motorcycle Club on the outskirts. 8 miles of frozen roads and cold that could steal life from your lungs. The Iron Thunder Clubhouse sat like a fortress against darkness, neon sign casting red and blue shadows across snow-covered parking lot. Lucas had heard stories about bikers who gathered there, tales whispered in hallways about men who lived by their own rules. But standing before their door at midnight, his sister shivering beside him, those stories felt less threatening than the man they had left behind. When Lucas knocked, sound echoed through night like a gunshot. Inside, he could hear rumble of voices, clink of bottles, low growl of classic rock. When the door opened, it revealed a man built like a mountain, beard streaked went gray, arms covered in tattoos that told stories of roads traveled and battles won. His name was Wade Morrison, though everyone called him Tank. When he looked down at the 2 children in his doorway, something in his expression shifted from suspicion to something softer. Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but words caught. "How do you explain you are running from the only home you have known?" Emma spoke instead, small voice cutting through cold air like a bell. "We do not have anywhere else to go," she said. And in those 8 words, she laid bare their truth with clarity that made Tank's chest tighten. Sometimes salvation comes wearing leather jackets and riding machines that roar like thunder. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones society tells us to fear. Follow Heart Stories for tales of unexpected families and courage found in desperate hours. Tank stepped aside without a word, gesturing them into warmth that smelled like motor oil and coffee. The Iron Thunder Clubhouse was nothing like the Bob Lucas had imagined. Yes, there were motorcycles in repair stages, walls decorated with patches from across America, but there was also a bookshelf filled with novels, a coffee pot that looked ancient, and a leather couch that sagged from years of hosting tired riders. 2 other men emerged from the back room. Casey Martinez, known as Wrench, was smaller than Tank but moved with precise efficiency of someone who understood engines better than people. Danny Sullivan, called Patch, carried himself with careful posture of someone trained to save lives under impossible circumstances. The Army medic patch on his vest told part of his story. They did not pepper Lucas and Emma with questions. Instead, Wrench disappeared into the kitchen and returned with steaming mugs of hot chocolate, the kind made from packets but warm by intent. Patch brought a first aid kit and knelt beside Emma, movements slow and unthreatening as he examined the bruise blooming across her cheek. Tank settled into a chair across from Lucas, eyes never leaving the boy's face. He had seen enough runaway kids to recognize the particular exhaustion that came not just from walking through snow, but from carrying fear like a backpack full of stones. When he spoke, his voice was gravelly but gentle. "You do not have to tell us everything tonight," he said, "but we need to know if you are safe to stay put, or if trouble is coming through that door." Lucas felt something crack open in his chest, a pressure valve releasing steam he had been holding for months. "Brad does not know where we are," he said. And then words started pouring out like water through a broken dam. He told them about his mother's death, about Brad's drinking, about rules that changed depending on how much bourbon was left in the bottle. He told them about Emma being perfect in school because imperfection meant consequences, about walking on eggshells that always cracked. But when he got to the phone and when he reached the messages from Tyler Chen, his voice faltered. How do you explain to strangers that the thing that broke everything was love? Tank leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Kid," he said, voice steady as bedrock, "whatever you are afraid to tell us, whatever you think might make us change our minds about helping you, I guarantee we have heard worse, and it will not change the fact that you both deserve to be safe." Emma looked up from where Patch was cleaning the cut on her lip, eyes finding Lucas across the room. She gave him the smallest nod, the kind of permission only a sister can give. Lucas took a breath that felt like jumping off a cliff. "I am gay," he said, and the words hung in air like smoke. "Brad found messages between me and another boy. That is why he hit us. That is why we had to leave." The silence that followed was not judgment or shock. It was men processing information, calculating next steps, deciding how to respond to a truth that had cost 2 children their home. Wrench spoke first, voice carrying slight accent of family who had crossed borders for better lives. "My nephew is gay," he said, "lives in California now with his partner. They sent me wedding pictures last month." Patch nodded, attention still on Emma's injuries. "My brother too," he said. "Army tried to kick him out back in the day, but he fought and won. Married his partner right here in Montana when it became legal." Tank just smiled, expression transforming his weathered face into something warm. "Son," he said, "love is love. Anyone who would hurt kids for being who they are is the problem." That night, Emma slept on the couch wrapped in a handmade quilt that smelled like home, while Lucas lay on an air mattress nearby. For the first time in months, he did not lie awake calculating escape routes. For the first time since his mother died, he felt like someone else was watching the door. Sometimes families are not born but forged through shared understanding rather than shared blood. Morning came with the smell of bacon and Maria Morrison humming in the kitchen. Tank's wife appeared carrying a tray with scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice in matching glasses. She was small with silver-streaked hair and hands that spoke of years nurturing both engines and people. When she looked at Lucas and Emma, her eyes held the same gentle acceptance her husband had shown. "I brought clothes that might fit," Maria said, setting down a canvas bag. "My grandson left some things, and there are items that belonged to our son Michael when he was your age." She studied Lucas with assessing gaze of someone who had raised children through difficult years. "Michael is 22 now, studying medicine at University of Denver. He comes home for Christmas, and I think you two would have a lot to talk about." There was something in how she said it, gentle emphasis that made Lucas look up with curiosity rather than suspicion. "He came out to us when he was 16. She said simply, 'Best thing that ever happened to our relationship. No more lies, no more pretending, just truth,' which is a gift not every parent gets." After breakfast, Wrench led Lucas to the garage where 3 motorcycles waited for attention, like patients in a mechanical hospital. "Want to learn something useful?" Wrench asked, gesturing toward a 1982 Harley Sportster missing its front wheel. Lucas had never worked on motorcycles, but his mother had insisted he learn basic car maintenance. Under Wrench's guidance, he found himself losing track of time as they rebuilt the engine. Meanwhile, Tank and Patch took a ride to conduct reconnaissance. The address was easy to find, a double-wide trailer on concrete blocks in a yard filled with rusted car parts and empty beer cans. The place looked exactly like what it was, home of a man who had given up on maintaining appearances. They observed from across the street, noting broken windows covered with cardboard, sagging front steps, neighbors who kept curtains drawn, and children inside. When they returned, Tank called Sarah Chen, a lawyer who specialized in family court and had a reputation for fighting harder for kids than most parents fought for themselves. She listened to Tank's summary without interruption, asked pointed questions about timelines and documentation, and promised to file emergency custody papers within 24 hours. The afternoon brought Emma's first real smile in months when Maria presented her with colored pencils and a sketch pad. Emma had always loved to draw, but Brad had considered it a waste of time and money. Now she sat at the kitchen table, tongue poking out in concentration as she worked on a picture showing a little girl and teenage boy standing beside 3 men on motorcycles, all smiling under a sky finely blue instead of gray. That evening, Tank sat beside Lucas while Emma and Maria worked on a jigsaw puzzle. "Kid," Tank said, voice carrying weight of experience, "I want you to know that what happened was not your fault. Being gay did not cause Brad to hurt you. Being honest about who you are did not bring this on. Brad hurt you because he is a broken man who never learned to handle his own pain without passing it to people smaller and more vulnerable." Lucas had heard similar words from counselors, but coming from Tank, they carried different authority. This was a man who had lived through his own violence and hardship, someone who understood that survival sometimes required choices that looked like weakness to people who had never been tested. When Tank said love was not something to be ashamed of, Lucas found himself believing it for the first time since Tyler Chen had sent that first tentative message. The snow continued falling outside, but inside the clubhouse, something that felt like hope was taking root. Emma's drawing was nearly finished, showing a family that looked nothing like traditional nuclear units, but was real in theirs. Sometimes the most profound truths are discovered not in great revelations, but in quiet hours spent learning that safety can be built with patience and kindness, one small act of acceptance at a time. Janet Rodriguez arrived on a Tuesday when snow had stopped, but cold remained bitter enough to freeze breath midair. Montana's Child Protective Services investigator stepped out of her state sedan carrying a briefcase that had seen better days. As someone who had seen enough broken families, Janet knew the difference between places that looked good on paper and places where children could actually heal. Tank met her at the door with calm presence, neither defensive nor overly eager. He had spent 3 days working with Maria and club members to transform a storage room into a proper bedroom for Emma, complete with twin bed, small dresser, and window overlooking mountains instead of parking lots. Lucas had been given space in the loft above the garage, his first private room since his mother died. Janet conducted interviews with methodical thoroughness. She spoke with Emma first, kneeling to the 10-year-old's level and using gentle questioning. Emma showed Janet her drawings, including the family portrait now hanging on the refrigerator next to Maria's grocery lists and Tank's maintenance schedules. When Janet asked how she felt about staying, Emma's answer was immediate. "They listen to me," she said. "And nobody yells here, ever. Even when Lucas broke the coffee pot yesterday, Tank just laughed and said accidents happen. Brad never laughed when we broke things." Lucas's interview took longer because his story was more complicated and he carried additional weight of being the older sibling. He told Janet about the night they left Brad's trailer, about the 8-mile walk through snow that could have killed them. He also told her about Tyler Chen, about coming out to people who responded with acceptance instead of violence. But the real test came when Brad himself arrived unannounced, pulling up in a pickup truck that belched black smoke. He climbed out with jerky movements of someone drinking since breakfast, face flushed with alcohol and anger. "Those are my kids," he announced, "and I am taking them home." Tank emerged flanked by Wrench and Patch, movements casual but purposeful. Behind them, Lucas saw Janet speaking quietly into her phone, calling backup from law enforcement. Brad made the mistake of assuming he could intimidate three men who had spent decades learning when to fight and when to stand their ground. Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes. Transforming the situation from potential assault into official matter of law, Brad found himself explaining to officers why he was demanding return of children who had fled with visible injuries. While Janet presented emergency custody order that Sarah Chen had filed, the legal paperwork was comprehensive and damning, built on hospital records documenting Emma's previous injuries, school reports noting declining performance and increasing absences, and testimony from neighbors who had heard but never reported sounds of violence. When faced with documentation of his failures, Brad's bluster collapsed into self-pity. That evening, after Brad had been escorted off property with warnings about violating custody orders, Michael Morrison called from Denver to speak with his parents about their new house guests. The conversation ended with Michael asking to speak directly with Lucas, a request that surprised no one but Lucas himself. Their first conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses as two young men tried to find common ground across age and experience. But Michael's voice carried the same gentle authority Lucas had learned to trust in his parents. And by call's end, Lucas felt connection with someone who understood what it meant to be gay in a place where such understanding was rare. Michael promised to visit during Christmas break, and Lucas found himself looking forward to the meeting with excitement and nervousness that felt like hope. Janet's final report recommended permanent custody transfer to the Morrison family. Sometimes justice arrives not with fanfare, but with quiet efficiency, transforming lives through paperwork rather than dramatic confrontations. 4 months later, Montana spring came early and brought transformation. Lucas stood in the garage doorway, watching Emma race around the parking lot with Maria's golden retriever, her laughter echoing off mountains like music missing from their lives. He had grown 3 inches since November, shoulders broadening with confidence from regular meals and absence of stress. Under Wrench's guidance, he had become skilled at motorcycle repair. More importantly, he had learned to trust his instincts, to make decisions based on hope rather than fear. Emma was thriving in ways that amazed everyone. Her grades were excellent, but more important was the return of her natural curiosity. She asked questions constantly, no longer afraid her interest might be seen as imposition. Maria had enrolled her in art classes. Brad Hutchinson had been sentenced to 3 years in prison for assault and child endangerment. The legal proceedings had been difficult but necessary, forcing both children to relive painful memories for promise that Brad would never again hurt them. The spring barbecue carried special significance as celebration of family that transcended traditional definitions. The parking lot filled with motorcycles and trucks, owners gathered with Maria's food, Wrench's ribs, and desserts from extended family. Lucas moved easily through conversations with people who now felt like family. They had loyalty and acceptance and protective instinct that made them dangerous to anyone who might threaten those they considered family. Michael Morrison had visited during Christmas, and awkward conversations had developed into mentorship and friendship. At 22, Michael was everything Lucas hoped to become: confident, successful, and comfortable with identity that had once seemed insurmountable. As evening shadows lengthened, Lucas found himself standing beside Tank, watching Emma demonstrate skateboarding tricks for appreciative bikers. Tank turned to Lucas. "Son," he said, using title that had replaced Lucas's name. "Maria and I have been talking about adoption, making this official. If you and Emma would want." The offer should not have surprised him. The Morrison family had provided everything: safety, acceptance, encouragement, and love that allowed children to heal and build toward futures filled with possibility. But hearing words spoken aloud made Lucas's throat tight. Emma appeared at Lucas's elbow, face flushed with happiness. She looked up at Tank. "Are you asking if we want you to be our real parents?" she asked. "Because we already decided that you are, whether there is paperwork or not. If you want to make it official, We think that would be awesome. Tank laughed, the deep laugh that had become familiar music to their new life. Well then, he said, I guess we better call Sarah Chen. As last guest departed, Lucas stood in the garage doorway that had become home. The air smelled like motor oil and barbecue smoke and promise of summer storms. But underneath was something else: safety, belonging, future filled with possibilities. Have you learned to trust yet? Tank asked. Voice carrying weight of someone who understood trust was skill developed through practice. Lucas considered the question seriously, thinking about small moments when he had chosen to believe in safety instead of scanning for danger. Getting there, he said, I am learning. Sometimes healing happens through quiet moments that rebuild what trauma tore down. Do you believe family is defined by love and choice? Subscribe to Heart Stories.